Good morning, friends, and welcome to Rocky Mountain Gardens. And today we're going to focus on that topic, spring gardening. Today we're going to discuss mulching. And that's something that is very important in your garden. But there are a lot of mistakes that people make with mulching, as well as the good things that come from this practice. So let's talk about the reasons why you should mulch in your garden. I'm going to list the reasons up here on the screen for you. So number one is it keeps the weeds down and makes them easier to remove if they do sprout. Number two, it slows the evaporation of water, which is quite important, especially if you live in a dry climate like I do. So makes better use of the water that you do use taking care of your plants. Number three, it insulates the soil, protects plants from extremes in temperatures, extreme hot days, extreme cold days in the winter. And lastly, number four, it can improve the look of your flower beds by spreading out a nice mulch. Let's move on now to mulching mistakes. First of all, I recommend that you weed your garden before placing the mulch on top of the soil. And that way, you're not going to have the weeds growing up through the mulch where you have to pull them out. And it's always a little bit more difficult to pull them out when you've got the mulch on top. So that kind of is common sense, don't you agree? Next, don't mulch too deeply. In other words, use 1 to 2 inches of mulch only. If you put the mulch too deep around your plants, it can cut off sources of water, like rain. It's harder to get down into the soil, and also oxygen that your plants need in order to grow properly. Never use your mulch as a soil amendment. Now, you probably know that soil amendments are things like compost that enrich the soil and feed the microbes that are essential for soil health. And most importantly, mulch, when it is added to soil, binds up the nitrogen in the soil that the plants need to grow. In other words, it makes it no longer accessible for use by your plants. Very good reasons to not use mulch as a soil amendment. Next, don't use fresh mulches such as hay from a pasture, because it might contain weed seeds from that pasture, and then you're just adding them into your garden to sprout and cause a lot of weeds to grow in your soil. And secondly, it may contain pesticides that, unknown to you, but those pesticides could actually kill your plants. Very importantly with mulch is that you do not pile it up high around the trunk of a tree, for example, or the base of any perennials or bushes that you have. For a tree, it can cause root rot around the collar, the base of the tree here, and it also encourages insect attacks to your plants. They can bore into the bark of your tree trunk and weaken the strength of that trunk. And lastly, therefore, leave a few inches around your tree open to the air and not piled up, as I said, around the trunk, or also your perennials and your bushes, treat them the same way. Very important to me as a cancer survivor is to garden organically as much as I possibly can. And, there are many pesticides and herbicides that have been shown to cause cancer. So I do keep that in mind when I'm choosing my mulch. For example, do not ever use dyed mulch. You see many of the bags of mulch in the big box stores that have red dye or black dye in them. These dyes are sprayed onto the pieces of mulch, and they contain toxins that can be very unsafe for pets and for children. They also can leach into the soil during rainfall, and that can destroy the beneficial microbes that live in your soil, making it harder for flowers to grow and bloom and be their most beautiful. Very important, avoid rubber mulch. I have seen bags and bags of this in my big box stores, and I know people are buying them. However, rubber mulch costs more, and in the hot summer when it is heated by the sun, it can release toxins into the air actually, and it releases a very unpleasant smell, as well as heavy metals such as cadmium, aluminum, zinc, chromium. High levels of zinc oxide can definitely kill your plants. That smell that is released can be absorbed into the soil and is very difficult to remove when you decide that rubber mulch wasn't what you thought it would be, and try to get rid of it. So when should you mulch? The best time is in the spring when the soil has warmed up for the season. And if you're expecting heavy rains, wait until after the rain to lay your mulch down, because if you put your mulch down first and then you get a heavy rain just pounding down in your mulch, it can wash it away and also make rivulets through your mulch that has to be redistributed after the rain. Totally makes sense. I'm sure you think so too. My last big tip is to just say no to landscape fabric. This is one of my pet peeves as a gardener. Even in my own house, I was the second owner of my home, there was landscape fabric with rocks on top everywhere and weeds growing in abundance. It was the largest mess you've seen, and such a big job to clean it all up. So landscape fabric actually is not the barrier to weeds that you think it might be, or that landscaping companies will tell you. Maintenance-free gardening. No, it's not. So what happens is, whether you're using rocks on top of the landscape fabric or mulch, what happens is the wind will bring in dust that will settle in there. And then it doesn't take much dust for a weed seed to germinate and come up right through your mulch. Very hard to weed. And since I do not want to use herbicides, I do hand weeding all the time, which is the safest way to maintain your garden. But in addition, the landscaping fabric decays over time, and as it starts to decay, weed seeds that are in the soil beneath it can poke their little sprouts right through that. And then when you try to remove them, you almost have to cut a hole in the landscaping fabric to get down there and get the root out that's underneath the landscape fabric. It's a very arduous weeding process. And as I said, it doesn't stop weeds from growing at all. And it just makes more work in the long run, in my experience. So putting mulch down on the bare soil is the way to go. Makes it very easy to just push the mulch away, dig out a weed that happens to sprout, comes out easily enough, and there you are. Perfect, easy to do. Push your mulch back, and then there's no bother. Also, you may have heard that landscaping fabric can make the soil sterile. And by that, I mean that the microbes that live in your soil and provide nutrients for plants die out because they're getting no oxygen, they're getting no water or very little. And so it makes it very difficult for them to survive. And the microbes are extremely important for the health of our plants. I plan to use leaf litter for mulch this year, particularly in my vegetable garden between the rows of my plants. And although I have a small vegetable garden, I believe it will really help to retain the moisture in my soil. Now, what I am doing here is I kept these leaves over the winter and they're all dried out, and I have smushed them down to break them into smaller pieces in this leaf bag. So don't forget to save your leaves for this very free source of mulch for your garden. I went to one of my local landscaping companies in order to find the type of mulch that I was seeking. And here you can see these huge bins of mulch. I actually brought some bins and buckets of my own to fill up and bring home. Now here you can see in my hand the type of mulch I am looking for. I want there to be fine, small pieces, shredded, the best that I can get, not those long strands and chunky nuggets. No, that's not the best for your garden at all. This finely shredded mulch will do the trick and will mat down as it is rained upon and things like that. It will mat down and protect your plants in the way that we talked about earlier. And I want to caution you not to buy in the big box stores those bags of the chunky nuggets. People think that they're heavier and that they'll stay in place better, but actually they get picked up by the wind and blown away much more easily. And this finely shredded mulch does a good job staying in place. And that's something that, of course, you really do want with your mulch. The main purposes of the mulch is to stay in place, to protect against temperature extremes like we said earlier, and also to hold in the moisture. And here is some of the mulch that I actually brought home in my garage for now until I'm ready to spread it around. So mulching is something that you can prep for early in the spring before actual gardening time comes. Have your mulch in place before spring has really sprung with all the new perennials popping up and so on. And so I hope this has been informative for you and that it can be useful as you prepare for another season of gardening. This is Mary saying thank you so much for stopping by, and I will see you again very soon.